Tonight we're going to talk about something that all of us, whether you're religious or not, tends to think about. Many of us perhaps are young, but many of us perhaps are not so young and are getting older. And we often wonder, especially in light of where we are today with the uncertain economy, perhaps uncertain health, just getting this message about my girlfriend's uncle reminds us of our mortality. I'm an emergency medicine physician. Of course, people in my sort of field, we see death every day. And it's not something that we ever get used to. People ask me that all the time, do you get used to people dying? And of course I tell them, no, I don't. And I believe personally, it's because that this is not something that we were designed for. This is not something that we were meant for. If you consider all cultures, all religions, there is some sort of belief in something more than this life. There's something more for us than we have right here. If you look at the economy right now and how bad it's gone down, there is one branch of medicine, if you look at how they're doing, that hasn't actually lost anything. They're actually doing quite well. They haven't had any problems. And it's actually unrelated to insurance. It's unrelated to HMOs. It's unrelated to anything because they only take cash, these types of physicians. And that's plastic surgery. It hasn't changed. There is a desire to be young, right? There's a desire to stay young. And it doesn't matter if you're from the United States or India or any other country. And perhaps some people who can't afford plastic surgery, there's still other ways that people try, right? They still try to look younger in other ways. People dye their hair, right? People use makeup. People will get other procedures done in order to look and feel younger. And even the people who are not going to change their appearance, you have people who are very conscientious. Many people are here that are very conscientious about their health. How many people are worried about their health or concerned about their health? A lot of people, right? Every hand went up. And so a lot of people, even though they are not going to do a procedure to look younger, they're going to eat a certain way, right? To live longer. They're going to exercise a certain way. They're going to have lifestyle changes that will enable them to live, to be younger. Right? I can tell you that the supplement industry, things like Manitech, things like Shaklee, things like other vitamins and minerals, and that's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's all outside of insurance. That's all outside private pay that people do, and people are willing to go to the mountains of Tibet to get an herb or go drink Tahitian noni or whatever. People are willing to do whatever it takes if it will add more quality and quantity to their lives. So are people just superficial, do you think? Everyone's just vain, maybe. I don't think so. I used to think that, actually, but now I realize, as I've been to 150 countries, that it is universal. All of us desire to be young. All of us desire to live forever. And no matter what you believe, no matter what your culture is, there's always something in that belief system that enables you to go on, to live forever, or to be forever young. Because, of course, even though we try our best efforts, right, we do the greatest possible changes in our lifestyle, it almost seems that not much changes. In my field of medicine, there have been huge advances to save people's lives, right? All you have to say is chest pain in the ER, and just like 10 people come into your room, right? Like within 5 seconds. It's amazing. But despite those advances, the average lifespan in the United States is about 79. Did you know that? Now, if you go back to ancient records, in fact, the book of Psalms, Psalm chapter 90, did you know that there is a lifespan given in the book of Psalms? Do you know what that lifespan is? 70 years, or if it's by strength, then what? 80. So basically, lifespan of 70 to 80. What's our average lifespan? 70 to 80. So how is it that despite all of our technology, there is no real change. There's no real increase in lifespan. Now, certainly, I will tell you right now that if you compare our lifespan now to the Dark Ages, well, certainly it's a lot better. But those concepts are not new. If you look at the Dark Ages, a lot of people died of communicable diseases, right? But that can be prevented and changed just by quarantine, just by hygiene, right? Those are very simple things. And those things are as old as the book of Leviticus. So those changes that have increased our lifespan have not been the thing that's really changed it. However, I am going to be introducing you to 3 groups of people tonight that is not true for. They live on average much longer than the 70 to 80. Every one of these people groups, on average, lives into their 80s. In fact, one of the people groups, on average, lives 89 years as an average. How is it that some people are able to live a decade longer than the rest of us? What's going on? What are they doing? Is it possible that we could all live that long, or perhaps even together, forever? When you look at medical science, we have often done autopsies on people. And when you look at the various organs of their bodies, you find something very unique. You find things that tell us that perhaps we weren't meant for just 70 to 80 years. If you look at especially the brain, how many of you study the brain, neuroanatomy or neuroscience? A few of you. If you look at people that are very, very old, and you look at the biochemistry of their brains, if you look at the actual cells of their brains, a very, very old person will have 6 to 7 generations of branching in their nerve cells. A very, very old person will have that. However, even that very, very old person has used how much of their brain, do you think? The capacity. How much of the hard drive is still left? Anyone know? Yes, exactly. In fact, we've taken people who are considered geniuses, people like Albert Einstein or Schweitzer, and they have looked at these gentlemen, and they found that even they aren't even using 10% of their brains. The capacity of the human brain is far beyond what any of us have achieved. Could it be that that hard drive is there for longer than 70 to 80 years, for much longer than we were ever thought to be able to live? I believe it is. And what I'm going to do tonight is share with you not only these 3 people groups, but I'm going to share with you what they do in hopes that you too can adopt positive lifestyle changes. However, there's something by the end of our presentation I hope you'll come to the conclusion about, is that as our bodies are more than just physical things, we are more than just the sum of our parts, right? I hope you'll find that this increase in longevity is not just a physical phenomenon. You know, in our minds is a very powerful connection to our bodies. In fact, I've seen patients who are critically ill. There's no way they can survive. There's no way. They're on multiple medications. They're on pure adrenaline, keeping their heart going. They're intubated. They're totally sedated. They're totally out of it. They don't seem to have any interaction with the outside world. However, what I have found is when there's family members on the way to see them, they somehow don't die. Have you ever noticed that? They somehow just keep going, but when the family arrives and is able to say goodbye, they somehow go at that point. and I haven't changed anything. I haven't done anything. Could it be that there's a connection between our minds and our spirits and our bodies? You know, have you ever heard of the placebo effect? Never heard of that? It's very, very powerful. People truly can make themselves well by thinking it, by being positive. But it's certainly a lot more than just positive thinking, right? It's certainly a lot more than just willing yourself to live longer. There's other ingredients, more than just perhaps what the scientists would say is going on. The first people group I'm going to take you to is actually from an island, and it's from the land of the rising sun. Have any of you ever heard of Okinawa? Okinawa is in part of what country? Japan, right? It's an island off the mainland, Japan, and Okinawans are a very unique part of Japan because they enjoy a lifespan which is 82 years. Now that may not seem like much to you, but their average is 82. Men are 78, women are 86. That's a lot longer. In fact, of actual countries, if you choose a country or a people group, they're the longest lived people in the world. And they have very unique features to them. Most Okinawans have their own gardens. They kind of live in a rural sort of fashion. They grow their own food. And many of them eat actually large meals. But their meals, although they are large, they don't have a lot of calories. They have carrots and cabbage and miso soups. If you look at their meals, their entire meal is about the same number of calories as one of our hamburgers. But it's very, very healthy for them. The Japanese also have another feature called ikigai, and that's a Japanese word that basically means the reason for which you get up in the morning. There are many people in Okinawa in their 80s and 90s that are still very active. There was a man who's 84 years old, and he is doing the decathlon every year. That is his ikigai. His favorite event, the pole vault, at 84. There's another phenomena in the Okinawan culture called a moai. A moai is basically a translation for a group of people that you go through life with. And this moai is made up of friends or family, and you get together on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week, just to kind of share experiences, to go through life together. However, there is one thing in Okinawa that is starting to change. In spite of the fact that they live so long, they also are experiencing the largest rate of decline of that longevity. We look at places like the industrialization of the fast food industry. McDonald's now has a strong hold in Okinawa. And now obesity rates have reached 10% or more in Okinawa. They actually are developing much worse habits than initially. The last survey showed that they were now climbing to the highest rates of obesity in all of Japan. And their longevity edge is slowly slipping away. The other culture that we have found is a culture in Europe. Sardinia. Has anyone heard of the Sardinians? What country are they from? They're also an island off the coast of Italy. The Sardinians have an amazing phenomenon. They have a centenarian ratio of 1-to-1, meaning that the people who get to live to be 100 are usually what sex do you think most of the time in most countries? Women, right? Women tend to live longer than men. It's pretty well straight across the board. Any country you look at, women live an average of 5 to 7 years longer than men. There's a lot of reasons for that. I can tell you from my standpoint in the ER, by the time a guy comes into the ER, he's like on death's door, basically. Well, I had this little skin cancer, but now it's like half my head is being eaten away by it. I just thought it'd go away. I literally had a guy like that. It was pretty scary. There were like maggots in the back of his head we had to pull out. It was terrible. He was still alive. They were able to remove it, but he lost his vision in one eye. But women are not like that. If you ask a woman, and she can tell you, like, to the day about everything about her health. That's one of the reasons why when they had birth control pills, they put the placebo in there. Did you know that? They put the placebo in there so that women would have their periods. Because if a woman misses her periods, it's like something's wrong. And she knows right away that something's wrong. A woman will tend to take care of her health a lot more than a guy. But there's many other reasons. War is another reason. Cardiovascular risk. Men tend to smoke more. They drink more. But in Sardinia, it's amazing that the people who reach 100, there's just as many men as women. And they have found that perhaps there is a reason for that, is that the family functions more as a unit rather than the guy's got to do this, the girl's got to do that. They all kind of just share the responsibilities. The man has a much greater role in the home and not so much just by himself in earning. The women actually go out and they do work alongside the men as well. One of the other things that is a feature of Sardinian culture is that every week or more, every family member, even the extended family, gets together for one meal. So in other words, can you imagine your entire family, everyone who's related to you, every week sitting down at one table and having a meal? And the one who's the oldest sits at the head of the table, the patriarch or the matriarch sits at the head of the table, and they enjoy that meal together. Another feature of Sardinian society is the concept of work. We have elderly people in our country who retire, but that is non-existent in Sardinia. They don't do anything like retiring. In fact, one of them was quoted at 85. He felt bad in the morning, but he still went out to the farm and did all his chores. And the reporter actually pulled him aside and said, well, why are you doing all this? Why are you going to work even though you don't feel well? He said, well, if I stayed home, I would be sick. So that is their thought process. That is their thinking, is that they don't stay home. They don't retire. Many of them in their 70s and 80s are still working at the same job as a shepherd or farmer or something like that. You know, when you reach 65 in Sardinia, it's just, life has just begun. Sardinians, like the Okinawans, also have a very rural economy. They have gardens, they have fruits and vegetables that they grow at home. And very interestingly enough, the grapes that are in Sardinia have found to have a compound called quercetin and resveratrol, which are powerful antioxidants that protect against heart disease. In fact, their grapes are found to be 3 times more powerful than the mainland grapes as far as the content of this. So that's a thought that many people have said that the reason they live longer is because they've got many of these features. They also eat mostly plant foods like the Okinawans. They do have some animal products in their diet, but most of those are very high in omega-3 fatty acids. One of the cheeses that they make is called pecorino cheese. It's a fresh cheese that they make, and it's very high in omega-3. However, the Sardinians also are losing their longevity edge. Industrialization, a move away from traditional lifestyle and traditional foods has caused the Sardinians to start to weaken in their average lifespan. Their obesity rate has reached 10%, and before, their obesity rate was 0 in their culture. There was no one that was obese in their entire society. Now, let me give you a contrast to that. The United States has about 300 million people. And when I say obesity, I mean greater than 20% overweight, okay? How many people do you think in the United States are obese? Over 100 million, actually. So 36% of us are considered obese. How many people are overweight? The majority now. And for the first time in American history, the majority of our society is now overweight. And so that kind of gives you an idea. The Sardinians had an obesity rate of 0 previously. Now they're up to 10%. They're starting to lose their longevity edge. They're starting to lose the blessing of living longer and better for so many years. However, there is one culture that is actually, according to National Geographic, not losing their longevity edge. And they don't live in a remote island. Did you know that? They come from all races. They come from all cultures. They come from all walks of life. In fact, a large concentration of them lives in the most polluted and densely populated area of California. Yes, it's Loma Linda, as a matter of fact. The third group, identified as the longest living group on the planet, are Seventh-day Adventists. Now, I did not grow up as a Seventh-day Adventist. I did not grow up as a Christian. But I did become one later in life. And a lot of it had to do with my interest in health as a scientist. The Seventh-day Adventists populate a large portion of Loma Linda. Not all of it, but probably about half of it. Loma Linda is in Southern California, probably not the best quality of air. Most of these people do not have their own gardens. They do not live in the country, contrary to the Okinawans. They live a lifestyle that's probably similar to most of us in the DC area. They live a lifestyle that is mostly urban and not necessarily rural. Not to say that living rural is bad, right? Not to say having your own garden is bad. Certainly, it's fantastic. It's a blessing. But sometimes that's not possible for some of us. So they populate an urban area. Seventh-day Adventists are not from one culture or another culture. If you look at our audience tonight, it's a fairly good representation. I think of the diversity of this denomination. They're in every continent of the world. Every country of the world probably has a few Adventists. What they have found is that the similarities between Adventists and the Sardinians and the Okinawans is most of the features are quite similar. There is a strong emphasis in a healthy lifestyle. And here we are. So, the fountain of youth, we've kind of talked about this. All of us desires to live forever. One of my friends is a dermatologist, and he does a lot of plastic surgery and things like that. And one of my friends wanted to work for him, not because she was so interested in doing dermatology, but when he's done with the Botox treatments, then he gives you the rest of it that's in the syringe. So she was hoping to get that and maybe look a little bit younger. But we kind of went through this. We dye our hair, we use makeup, etc. I just had a bunch of blueberries this morning myself. Gram for gram, very powerful antioxidants. But in spite of all we do, you know what happens anyway, unfortunately. There's a couple things that you can't get away from, and death, unfortunately, is one of them. We talked about the brain and its capacity for learning and data. I believe that we were not just designed from our minds to live forever, but if you look at all of our organs, you find the same thing. How many of you seen this magazine? This is actually where a lot of the content of this lecture has come from. We talked about the Japanese people and their lifestyle in Okinawa. Many of the people who live kind of a agrarian lifestyle, they're still diving offshore. That guy is in his 80s, actually, 84. This guy who does the decathlon, Fumiyasu, is in his 80s. They all typically have their own gardens, lots of produce. This guy is actually 104. And I thought it was pretty interesting. He goes out and gardens every day, and they interviewed him, and they said, "So why do you wear red gloves? Does that kind of help you?" He's like, "No, they're just easy to find." Because his vision wasn't so good, so he just would find the red gloves. We talked about the Moai. We talked about the end of society, the golden arches. I think that we in the United States are starting to come around on this, because I recently found that, did you know what McDonald's is putting into all their Happy Meals? Apple slices, actually. So they're kind of moving away from just the burger and fries concept. We talked about Sardinia, their way of life also very agrarian, very rural. This gentleman right here is 103. When they interviewed him as to why he lived so long, he said, "No one knows why we live so long, not even me." That was his answer. This is Giuseppe, his famous line, "If I stayed home all day, then I would be sick." They don't usually eat this, by the way. One of the criticisms about Sardinia, though, is that they are all related. If you look at the genetics of the Sardinians, you find that 80% of them are related to the original inhabitants of the island. So that's actually been a little criticism. You also get kind of a very isolated sort of effect in the gene pool when you're from an island. You know, you tend to intermarry with the same people on the island. And so a lot of people have criticized that perhaps the Sardinians only live longer because of their genes. But as I shared with you, they're not living any longer. They're starting to get obesity. They're starting to die. And another criticism is that there's only 2,400 of the Sardinians. But what about you? You know, you don't live in the garden. You don't live in an island. You live in smoggy Loma Linda or smoggy DC. Can you live longer? Yes, of course you can. Absolutely. And there's not just 2,400 people, but about 18 million people in this people group. That's the Seventh-day Adventists. Who knows who this is? She's 100, by the way. Still was driving in her hundreds. It's Marge Jatan. She was a nurse, actually married to a physician who also died at 98, both Seventh-day Adventists. Does anyone know that she just died recently? She was 106 when she died, and she had her driver's license, I think, till the day she died, actually. This gentleman is perhaps the oldest water skier in the world. This is Frank Shearer, MD, physician. Most of us as physicians do not live as long as he does. However, he has kind of broken that rule and lived well into his hundreds. He lives actually where I'm from, in Washington. This is actually one of my professors where I went to medical school. Dr. Wareham still assisted with cardiothoracic surgery in his 90s. He's actually just retired now. But he still was very steady. His hand didn't shake or anything like that. I remember actually meeting him one time, and he was very, very sharp. And this is him actually 91 with someone's chest split open there. This is Lidia Newton. At the time of the article, she was 112, and she was among the top 20 people on the face of the earth. The interesting thing that an article said about her, and this person was not Christian, they were not Adventists, they were just the author of the article of National Geographic. They said, you know, God may or may not have something to do with it, but certainly this woman's religion does. So they examined the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now this figure is actually not accurate. It's actually about 18 million now. Come from all walks of life, all cultures. And the common bond is the religion and lifestyle that these people enjoy. They share some commonalities with the Okinawans and Sardinians. Don't smoke or drink. All of us are family-oriented. All of us have daily activity and a plant-based diet. However, this is actually from Newsweek. How many of you have read Newsweek? Have any of you seen this article? This is actually a recent article. This is just from last year. And they actually had a flow chart to show you how to live to be 100. You're born, some things you can't control, right? You want to be what? A woman, right? But the next thing is what? Now, do you think the editor at Newsweek is Seventh-day Adventist? No, not at all. Do you think maybe we paid him or something like that? The Seventh-day Adventist, the Remnant Church sent him something. Believe me, they probably couldn't afford to put one page in Newsweek, let alone an entire article. But here it is, right here. There's other things too that we're going to talk about, but I find it very intriguing that the very second thing on how to live longer is being a Seventh-day Adventist. Lastly, how many of you have read U.S. News and World Reports? This is just updated this year in January. They listed the top 11, it was 10, but the top 11 ways to live to be 100. Let's start from the beginning. There are many people that I take care of in the ER, and I can tell you that the majority of the sicker people tend to be older or younger. What do you think? Older. They're older. But it's very intriguing. These senior citizens that I'm taking care of are actually being taken care of by a set of older people. Did you know that? Have any of you ever seen these people in pink uniforms in hospitals? What are they doing? They're volunteers, that's right. And did you know that they all tend to be older? They're retirees. Why is it that there's one group of people who I take care of that's sick, while there's another group of people that's pushing that person to the CT scanner? They're the same age. What do you think makes the difference? I asked the patients in the gurney what they did when they turned 65. And the people in the gurney, what did they do? They retired. How about the people pushing them around? Why retire? I'm having a great time. That's one of the biggest components. Don't retire. The second one in the article was very intriguing. How many of you heard about flossing and longevity? I mean, how is it that a piece of string could help you live longer? And what they have found is that the bacteria between your teeth actually can get into your bloodstream. Did you know that? And it can seed your heart and the vessels in your heart. And they have found that people who floss daily actually live longer. The author of this study, there was an interview with him, and he said, I think you would get the most benefit by flossing twice a day. Wow. Bring your floss with you, right? I did. Number 3, if there's any one thing that is perhaps by itself the fountain of youth from a physical standpoint, it's exercise. How many of you know what a meta-analysis is? Anyone know familiar with that term? One person, two people? A meta-analysis is when we as physicians and scientists take all of the articles on a subject and boil it down to like one summary. That's a meta-analysis. And if you look at a meta-analysis on exercise, for every hour that you exercise, you will live that hour over again. And then another 2 or 3 hours on top of that. So if you exercise just 1 hour a day, you are adding perhaps an 1/8 to a 1/6 more to your lifespan. And that is straight across the board. All cultures, well, what kind of exercise? It didn't matter. People who did any amount of exercise, the time period was given back to them and also multiplied by 2 or 3. On another point, when they did a meta-analysis on smoking, every cigarette you smoke shortens your life by 10 minutes, in addition to the time that you smoke the cigarette. So every one of those sticks just clip off a little 10-minute period from your life. Very, very clear correlation. Whoops. Let me go back. What they also found is, you've heard that breakfast is the most important meal, right? They have found, though, that it does matter what you eat for breakfast. I'm very thankful for Bliss. He's stocked me up with all these whole grain cereals and granola in my hotel room. So I can actually get a whole grain cereal for breakfast. And what they found that happens is when you eat whole grains in the morning especially, that it actually will regulate your blood sugar for the rest of the day. So if you are single and you don't have time to cook, what you can do is get a little crock pot. How many of you have seen those little small crock pots, those little, just maybe less than half a quart or a quart size? Put your grains in there overnight, maybe with some dried fruit, and then cook that overnight. And then in the morning, before you go to work, you can eat your cereal and get maybe a few extra years to your life. This is probably the worst one for me. You have to sleep at least 6 hours a night. And what they have found, this is just recent, is that it matters the quality of sleep as well as the quantity. How many of you have ever heard of the hormone melatonin? Anyone heard of melatonin? What they have found is that melatonin is perhaps the one hormone that will allow you to live forever. If you can get your own body to produce it, not just take it, exogenously. What they have found is that when you look at people, when they go to sleep, the number one thing that cuts their melatonin production, in fact, most people in this society will have their melatonin cut in half tonight. Why do you think that is? If you eat a big meal before you go to bed, they have found that your melatonin production is slashed in half if you eat a large meal. So even if you get enough hours of sleep, it's not the same quantity. How many of you seen these energy drinks now? Those are getting very, very popular, right? Very, very popular. If you have one serving of a caffeinated beverage, just one, you will cut your melatonin production in half for 2.5 days. One drink. And how many people drink just one every 3 days? Right? Can you imagine how that affects your sleep? How that affects your production? And people say, oh, caffeine doesn't affect me. Let me tell you, the hormone levels don't lie. You drink one serving and you will cut your melatonin production in half for 2.5 days. Don't do it. And it doesn't matter. They looked at all types of beverages. I don't care if it's mate or some other cultural drink. It doesn't matter. If it's a caffeine-containing beverage, one serving does the damage. So it's not just the hours of sleep, but it's the quality of sleep. They've also found that melatonin production, growth hormone, things like cortisol levels are related to going to sleep, what do you think, later? It's earlier, right? They've done studies actually on night shift workers like me. I have to work night shifts. Unfortunately, people aren't just injured during the day. So they've done studies on people like me, and they have found that when they look at our circadian rhythm, they see a day rhythm, and they expect to see a night rhythm in a night shift worker, but did you know they don't see that? They see a day rhythm, but it's just blunted. We're not designed to be night creatures. That's just a very, very plain fact. So I would suggest you not only get the sleep, enough quantity, but make sure you get good quality. They've also found that there's simple things to enhance your melatonin production, and that's complete darkness. Have you heard that? If you have complete darkness, get a room darkening shade. Like if you have to sleep during the day, like I do, get a room darkening shade. I have blinds and a shade on my windows and a mask and earplugs. So when I'm asleep, I'm asleep. So it's very important to enhance the quality and not just the quantity of your sleep. Number 6 was probably something that you would know anyway. The people who live longer tend to eat whole foods. Now, I'm going to share something that might scare some of you, but the concept is not just refined foods, right? All of us know that, yeah, sure, you can be vegan, but potato chips are vegan too, right? So are French fries. But we all know in our heart of hearts those probably aren't the best foods for you, right? But what they have found is that they have done, this is a recent study from Scandinavia. They did a study on smokers, and smokers tend to get what kind of cancer? Lung cancer, right. So what they did is they took smokers and they divided them into 3 groups, and they followed them for several years and saw how much lung cancer they developed. The first group was the control group. Do you understand what a control group is? It means we don't do anything to that group, we just watch them. The second group, they supplemented them with foods that were high in antioxidants. You guys know what antioxidants are? Anyone know what the antioxidant vitamins, minerals are? A, C. It's easy to remember. Just remember ACEs. ACEs is the best, right? A, C, E, and selenium, right? So just remember that, A, C, E, and selenium. What they found is that they supplemented foods that were high in A, C, E, and selenium, like carrots, right, oranges, things like that, nuts, Brazil nuts. Actually, 2 Brazil nuts gives you all the selenium you need for the day. Did you know that? Pretty interesting. So they supplemented foods in one group, and in the third group, they didn't change their diet. They just had them actually take vitamins. that were A, C, E, and selenium. Several years into the study, they actually had preliminary results. You have to do that. Like, you have to look at the data, like the preliminary, to see where it's going, because there's an ethical issue. If you find that there's an advantage, like let's say if there's an advantage for the vitamins, from an ethical issue, you have to put everyone on it. Does that make sense? You can't just let everybody die prematurely without getting the benefit. And also, if you find that something is harmful, you have to also inform that group. So halfway through the study, they looked at it, and the control group, what do you think happened to the control group as far as lung cancer? They got lots of lung cancer. What do you think about the people who ate carrots and foods that were high in antioxidants? What do you think? They got less. Now, what do you think about the supplement group? They actually had to stop the study prematurely because the supplement group got more cancer than the control group. It might scare some of you, but that's what they found. So they actually had to terminate the study, take the people off of those vitamins, and tell them that they got to eat carrots and broccoli and kale and all the other stuff. So there's at least a few studies out there that are actually against supplementation in the form of pill. What I would recommend, if you want to supplement your diet, use foods, right? You can use a juicer if you want. If you can't eat enough carrots, you can juice some carrots or something like that. But at least you're getting the antioxidants in the same ratio, right? Does that make sense? Whole foods are always better than pills. Remember that. Number 8, now this was published in this magazine in 2012, I'm sorry, I missed number 7. Number 7, I'll just say this. It's not always what you're eating, but what's eating you. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever heard of the type A personality? How many people here are type A? Don't raise your hand. I'll raise my hand. I'm type A, at least in some ways. What's the type A personality? What do they like? Very driven, right? Go, go, go. Very time-oriented, right? Very organized, very ambitious, very punctual, right? Leader, right? Not always happy when other people are late, right? Very driven. Most people in my profession are type A personalities. But you know what they found? That it's actually not the type A personality that's bad. Because at first they thought that this was a very serious problem, because they found that people with type A personalities died more frequently. And they died younger, especially from heart attack. But they kind of looked at the personality carefully, and they found that some features were not bad. What do you think wasn't bad about being type A? Being on time. Being on time was fine. Ambition was fine. Organization was fine. Being driven was fine. Being a leader was fine. There were only 2 things in the type A personality that were actually associated with increased mortality. One of them, what do you think it was? Intolerance. Intolerance of others. It's okay for you to be on time, but when someone else is not on time, that is what did you in. Intolerance was one, and anger was the other. They actually found that in a 30-minute period of anger, just in that period, your risk rate for fatal MI was 300% higher. Just during that 30 minutes. Now, the reason for that is you're releasing a lot of adrenaline, epinephrine and norepinephrine, and those constrict the coronary arteries. They're thinking that that may be the reason for increased death. So remember, it's not a problem to be type A. Just don't expect everyone else to be type A. Does that make sense? And when they mess up, be nice to them. Don't, be ready to take them out or whatever. And, oh, how could you do this? You're late. You messed this up. You messed that up, right? It's okay. Just roll with the punches. That's what I had to do when the screen didn't come up, right? I want to live, right? Number 8, published in U.S. News and World Reports, was they actually said live like a Seventh-day Adventist, but I changed it a little bit. I said be a Seventh-day Adventist. A Seventh-day Adventist in North America, on average, will live 89 years. That's 10 years longer than the average person in North America. That is incredible. And a lot of people would say, well, they're vegetarians. Well, I have news for you. Not all of us are vegetarians, right? And did you know Buddhists are vegetarians? But they don't live longer, right? Well, they say, but Adventists are family oriented. Hey, so are the Baptists, right? So are other religious groups. But they don't live longer, right? Well, the Seventh-day Adventists, they take a day of rest, right? They take the Sabbath off, right? And they unplug. But did you know the Jews have been doing the same thing for thousands of years? But they don't live longer. Well, the Seventh-day Adventists, they don't smoke, they don't drink caffeine. I wish that were true, but anyway, that's what they say. So that's why they live longer. Did you know the Mormons do the same thing? Did you guys know that? Did you know Mormons do almost the same thing as Seventh-day Adventists? But they don't live longer. They've tried to study the Mormons like this, but they have not made it onto Oprah, Anderson Cooper, all those other places because they simply don't live longer. The data's not strong enough. So why? If other people have the same lifestyle things, why don't they live longer? My challenge to you is it is more than the physical parameters. And have you ever heard of something called synergy? Synergy is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We're going to talk about that concept this weekend. Number 9, be a creature of habit. Have you ever noticed that if you're used to getting up and going to sleep at a certain time, you're hungry at certain times, you exercise at certain times, you kind of miss it when it goes off a little bit? I can tell you that this is very striking when you do a transatlantic or transpacific flight. Your circadian rhythm is so garnished to that habit that you can actually get sick if you go off of it. And they found people who have a regular routine tend to not only live longer from the routine, but they tend to have habits that are established and they tend to be better habits. So be a creature of habit. Number 10, stay connected, right? Not just with family, but with friends. What they found in a study is that if you maintained a close relationship with a sister throughout your lifetime, you had a much lower incidence of depression than anyone else. Isn't that interesting? Let's hear it for sisters, right? Amen. Now, when they looked at brothers, it actually didn't pan out. I don't know why. Maybe sisters are better listeners. I'm not sure. But stay close to your family. I know many of the cultures represented in this room are very family-oriented. And you know what? No matter if you have problems with that person, they're still your family, right? You can't divorce your family. You can't divorce them, and don't. It's not that they're going to suffer, right? If you have bitterness and anger towards someone, who does it hurt? It doesn't hurt them, it hurts you. In fact, I've known people who are bitter and angry against someone that was dead. Did you know that? Listen, believe me, you're not hurting them anymore. They are asleep. They are resting in peace. They're not rolling over in their grave because you're like, oh, I'll get you someday, right? They're totally immune to that. But you're not. So forgiveness is not just about the other person, it's about you. Do you realize that? Very, very important. Stay connected. And the last one was intriguing. There's an entire book that they wrote about this last one. They followed children for 80 years. This is the longest study known to man so far. They followed young children for 80 years. And they tried to figure out what character trait would give the greatest longevity. And this was associated not just with longevity, but with successful marriages, with avoiding jail, with economic success, with educational success. And it's very interesting, but it was being conscientious. That almost is a moral quality, isn't it? Conscientious means you do what you say, and you say what you do. Conscientious means you keep your appointments, you keep your word, right? I mean, a lot of people try to say that, well, they kept their doctor's appointments and that's what kept them living longer. But remember what I said, right? Even if you look at ancient records, not just the Bible, but outside the Bible, it's 70 to 80 years. As much as I'd like to say that modern medicine has done wonders for our lifespan, it really hasn't. That's the truth. And I'd be lying if I did say it was true. Certainly the trauma victims I take care of, they won't say that. They'll say, yes, I'm living longer because of this technology. But by and large, the average does not show that data to be true. So, we have three very secular sources talking about longevity. The secret, right, for healing, the secret for living longer. So what is the secret? You know, we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about diet. We talked about exercise. Maybe it's your genes. You know, I just went to an interesting presentation. Does anyone know what epigenetics is? Epigenetics is not just your genetic code, but things that influence your genes that can be turned on or turned off. And did you know that your lifestyle habits, although they cannot change your genes, it can turn off the bad ones and turn on the good ones? And that lasting effect does not just influence you, but they found that your epigenes have an influence about 60 to 80 years down the line in your ancestors. In fact, the study itself said roughly 3 or 4 generations. Intriguing? You ever heard that phrase somewhere before? It's actually in the book of Exodus, isn't it? 3 or 4 generations. Your decisions will affect down the line through your epigenes the next generation and the next one and the next one and the next one. Is it genetics maybe? Maybe optimism. Maybe that's what helps you live longer. Well, how about faith? We're going to be talking about not just physical things this weekend, but tomorrow we're going to be talking about faith. And we are going to be sharing some of the secrets with you. I want you to know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not a secret society. You know, it's not that we don't want to share why we live longer, stuff like that. We're going to allow you to learn some of the things that are outside of the physical. Most people know about vegetarianism. They know about not smoking, not drinking. We're going to share with you some of the more subtle things about being a Seventh-day Adventist that are over and above the physical, so that you too can take advantage of those things. Because I believe that we, all of us, whether we are white, black, male, female, religious or not, we are all designed for the best possible quality and quantity of life. God desires that we would prosper in all things and be in health, just as our soul prospers. And I believe that's because, as Ecclesiastes 3:11 tells us, that He has put eternity into our hearts. So if you'd like to learn more, please come tomorrow. You have an invitation, a formal invitation, not just from me, but from the Remnant Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thank you very much.